Welcome into the Jazz Notes podcast. I'm your host, Ben Anderson. No Chandler Holt today, so I will be rolling solo. Alas, we still have a big show for you today. As always, we will wrap up with your mailbag. A lot of questions today. You can find me on Twitter at Ben's Hoops. Read me at KSLSports.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, etc. Threads at KSL Sports. You can always ask questions that way. But also before that, some big news from the last week for the Utah Jazz. Excited to dive into. We can do that quickly with the release of 4 new jerseys for the Utah Jazz. This was something that we had talked about quite a bit on the podcast. In fact, last Tuesday, we were getting inundated with questions about it. And then the Jazz released the jerseys on Wednesday. So you got the rebrand, and not all of it's finalized yet. We have not seen the courts that are going to match the jerseys, assuming there are courts. I actually don't know that. But they've always done that in the past, and it's not like they're going to use old courts for new jerseys. But I thought the reaction was pretty widely accepted. I think Jazz fans were excited about these new jerseys. As I had told you, they were going to stick with black, and purple and white were going to be the primary colors. I had not heard about the sky blue that they went with. I thought that was a nice accent on the jerseys, and obviously opens up some future opportunities to rebrand and continue to look like that Carlos Boozer, Darren Williams, Mehmet Okur era in the early 2000s when they went with some of those light blue colors. But I thought the jersey release was a success. I thought it matched a lot of the things that I had reported they were going to hold on to, leaning heavily into the mountains, and that's something that they did. And that's what Jazz fans wanted, and I think that's what you got. After 2 years of jerseys Jazz fans were not that excited about. They tried to do something different. They listened to what Jazz fans wanted and reversed course and delivered something that, like I mentioned, Jazz fans were pretty universally happy about. So excited to see how those jerseys actually look on the court. I think one of the interesting things is that they always look different in person on players than they do even on mannequins or in these mock-ups and the art releases that you see. They're certainly going to look a little bit different than the Junior Jazz jerseys that you've seen. So excited to see them on the players. Who looks good in them, who doesn't. I remember all the retro jerseys or the callback jerseys always looked good, except for on certain players. Like Joe Ingles never looked good in a Mountain jersey. Joe Ingles never looked good in the classic Jazz Mardi Gras logo, the Jazz Note jersey. I never thought those really matched him, but everyone else seems to look cool in them. So we will see how they actually look on the players. Also worth noting that a lot of the Jazz players on this last roster liked the black and the yellow jerseys and the white jerseys. I told you Lauri Markkanen's favorite jersey that he has played in as a member of the Jazz is the yellow jersey, which is the most hated by Jazz fans. He said he was going to have one of those framed and set up in his house. So he was a fan of the yellow, wore a lot of yellow shoes because he likes the yellow. So saying goodbye to those. Kind of interesting. I know some people read into the fact of who was in the photo shoot for those new jerseys. It was Lauri Markkanen, it was Walker Kessler, it was Keontae George, and it was Taylor Hendricks. I will tell you from talking to people in the offseason and talking to those guys at the end of the regular season, a lot of that was just who's in town. I wouldn't read too deeply into, this is the future of the team, or, these are guys they wouldn't trade, or, these are the guys they're going to build around, etc. Lauri Markkanen was sticking around in Salt Lake because his kids are in school, and he wanted to be here while they were wrapping up school. The young players are all working out in Salt Lake City and trying to work out as closely as they can to home to get used to the altitude, put in a lot of work this summer. You remember Bryce Sensabaugh and Taylor Hendricks were both hurt last year, so they didn't get to do the offseason work. But the Jazz want them around leading up to the summer league here. And then same goes for Walker Kessler. He's just sticking around and working out. So I don't think it was necessarily about, why isn't Jordan Clarkson in this photo, or why isn't Colin Sexton in this photo? I think those guys travel. I think those guys are on vacation, and the young guys aren't. You can ask them to do it. And then Lowry was going to be here anyways. So that's why they chose to have those players in the launch specifically. Other big news from the week, this actually was just announced earlier today. The Jazz are going to be hosting a draft party at the Delta Center. Doors will open at 5 p.m. on Wednesday, June 26th. They're only doing it for day one. Remember, the draft has been split into 2 different days, and the first round is going to be held on June 26th. So 5 p.m., the actual draft starts at 6 p.m., and it's going to go until the conclusion of the first round. And the Jazz have a pick at number 29, the second to last pick, so it's going to be busy. The Jazz hold the 10th pick, the 29th pick, and the 32nd picks overall. The second round of the draft is going to begin at 2 p.m. Mountain Time on Thursday, so kind of interesting there. If you aren't going to the Delta Center, or even if you are, you can put on the old headset or listen on your phone. I would highly advise you listen to the KSL Sports broadcast last year. I did it with Jake Scott and former BYU head coach Steve Cleveland, and he was absolutely awesome. I thought our draft coverage was the best that you could find in the state. I put a lot of work into it, obviously, as does Coach Cleveland. He just watches a lot of college basketball, and Jake's great as well. So I thought we had a really fun time breaking down all the players, going through the entire first round. Now, last year we did the second round as well. Obviously, we're not going to do that on the air on Wednesday, but we will pick up our coverage on Thursday. I don't know if Steve Cleveland's going to be with us. I think that's the hope again. But as you were going to hear coming up on this episode, I'm going to break down some of the players available for the Jazz, and you're going to get more of that breakdown live pick by pick. If you missed it last year, I thought it was pretty fun to do and pretty in-depth, and I hope a lot of people pulled something out of it. I thought it was very successful. So that's the Jazz Draft Party coming up on Wednesday, June 26th, 5 p.m. The doors open at the Delta Center. All right, well, let's dive into some of the names. This is an opportunity without Chandler here. One of the main things I've really been working on other than Jersey talk is these draft prospect breakdowns for the Jazz coming up at number 10. And I'm probably almost done with guys that are going to be on the board at 10. I've probably got 2 or 3 more players to break down, and I will do that this week for sure. But I've already written down big breakdowns. I watch all the games. I make sure I'm not just watching highlight tapes. Every player looks good in highlight tapes. It's a stupid way to watch draft prospects. And I'm not saying if you're just a Jazz fan and just trying to figure out who these guys are, that's a bad way to do it. Some of the breakdowns on YouTube are really cool. I think for me personally, I need to watch a player. I need to see body language. Not that I read too much into that, but I just need to feel how involved they are in the game. I need to get a feel for who they are as players, not just, oh, well, yeah, of course, every shot in the highlight tape goes in, or here's their best dunks on the season. I want to see the reads they make. I want to see what they're doing when they don't have the ball in their hand. I want to see if they're running hard. I want to see if you just naturally always see them involved in the game. Some guys are just always around. Some guys always are making an impact on the game, whether they have the ball or not. And some guys, yeah, they'll hit a 3 or they'll get a big block shot, but everything in between really just doesn't quite show up, and that's an issue. So I like to watch the players, especially for that reason, just to get a full picture. And I'll just go in order of how I've written these out. You can go find them at kslsports.com. This is always one of my favorite things that I do every year. I like diving into college basketball after the season has ended. I really don't like watching it during the year. I don't like caring about the results of the games because the results really don't matter. But I like to watch them after the fact and just be able to scout on these specific players. Let's start with one of the more controversial players in the draft that could be available at 10. In fact, a lot of mocks have him available to the Jazz and being selected at number 10. That's Rob Dillingham, the guard out of Kentucky. Averaged 15.2 points, 3.9 assists, 2.9 rebounds. Unbelievable shooter, 47% from the floor, 44% from 3, 79% from the free throw line. So all the shooting numbers really check out. The one thing about Kentucky guards historically is they play better in the NBA than they did in college. That's a Coach Calipari thing at Kentucky. That's a talent thing at Kentucky. It's just kind of a weird situation. But, Tyrese Maxey, you can go down the list, Devin Booker, Manuel Quickley. It goes on and on and on of players who significantly outperform where they get drafted. And you always have to consider that when you talk about Kentucky guards. And I won't be surprised if Rob Dillingham ends up being a better player than his draft stock ends up showing, because that's always been the case at Kentucky. But there are other things to consider with Rob Dillingham outside of just who are the rest of these Kentucky guards that have played well. Most notably that he measured in at just over 6 feet tall. I think it was 6'1", and he weighs 165 pounds. It's so unbelievably small for the NBA to try and compete night in and night out at that level. And I hear a lot of people, and I've seen a lot of the conversation about, well, if anyone's likely to be a star in this draft class, Rob Dillingham's offense gets him there. It's just like, find me the other 6-foot guards in the NBA who are dominating, and then tell me what they weigh. And most of these guys that are small but still, are able to cut it on a night in and night out basis are well over 200 pounds. You look at Donovan Mitchell, who's probably 6'2", 6'3", he's got to be 200 pounds. I mean, he is built so heavy in his chest. Jalen Brunson's another good example of it, built so heavy in his chest. There are some smaller players. Kyrie Irving is not the biggest player in the NBA physically, but he's much bigger than Rob Dillingham is. I mean, he's listed at 6'2". I'd have to pull up his weight here, but he's just got a bigger frame, 195 pounds. That's 30 pounds. And go watch Kyrie. Watch him play in the finals. he looks little when he's out there. It's just a really small body to try and compete with, to not only be 6 feet tall, but also to be 30 pounds less than the other guys who are your height. Darius Garland, who is maybe his most common comp, is 6'1", 192 pounds. So, I think Rob Dillingham's going to add weight, but he's got to add 30 pounds. It's a significant number. It's not, 10 pounds, 15 pounds. That's just going to come on as he gets older. It's a lot of weight. Now, he's electric. He gets a lot of separation with the dribble in his hands. He gets his shot off quickly. Deadly as a spot-up shooter, so he can be off the ball. Deadly shooting off the dribble, so he can create his own shot. Finishes at a bizarrely high level for a player his size. Gets into the paint, has a lot of finishes, can get to the rim, can really dunk in transition. You've seen some of his windmill dunks. He can get up above the rim really easily. But again, that's playing in Kentucky in college. Against a just completely different type of defense than you're going to see in the NBA, and I think that's going to be a struggle for him. And that's just the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, A, he gets picked on because he's so small. B, he's just a bad defender. He makes bad decisions. He goes the wrong place. He's a very poor defensive decision maker on top of being so small that he's got some real defensive detractors. And one of the things I've really keyed in on this year in some of my draft coverage is if you're drafting best player available, if the guy doesn't play defense, you can't call him best player available. You have to play defense to be a good to be a good NBA player anymore. You just look at the NBA, look at the good teams that win games. Everyone on the floor can defend, and Rob Dillingham is going to be one of the worst defenders, if not the worst defender from this class. And I think that's a pretty significant red flag for him on top of his body. I do think he's going to stick in the NBA because he's going to score, but if you're looking for things the Jazz need, scoring guards is actually not one of them. Let's move on to his backcourt teammate, Reed Sheppard, the guard at Kentucky, a player who I'm significantly higher on. Also didn't measure in with enormous numbers, close to Rob Dillingham's height, just a little over 6'1", does weigh significantly more coming out of the combine, 187 pounds. Also had really excellent testing numbers as far as his vertical leap was up over 40 inches. Some of that gets gamed, and you don't necessarily see it every time he steps on the floor, but I don't think it's going to be hard for him to compete athletically in the NBA, and I think his size does give him an opportunity to make it, despite the fact that he is just over 6 feet tall. 12.5 points, 4.5 assists, 4 rebounds, maybe the best shooter I've ever seen of any player coming out of college. 53% from the floor, 52% from the three-point line. Again, 52% from the three-point line and 83% from the free throw line. Also well over 2 steals a game. He's just so cerebral. He blocks a ton of shots. He gets a ton of steals. He moves the ball forward. He plays really aggressively with the ball in his hands as a passer. He doesn't over-dribble. There's just nothing I've seen that I don't like about Reed Sheppard's game. And I know some people are asking, well, can he be a point guard? And if he's not a point guard at that height, fine. He's off the ball, and he's a dead-eye shooter off the ball. And you need to have a bigger guard next to him, and that might be difficult for the Jazz because Keontae George is not huge. Colin Sexton's not huge, and so maybe you end up with a smaller backcourt there. I think he would be a guy that if he's there at 10, and by the way, there's no way he's on the board at 10, you would absolutely draft and take. I think he's going to be a long-time NBA player. There's 10 NBA comps for him that exist that range from, really good role players like Alex Caruso to, Grayson Allen, who has found a way to make it in the NBA as just a shooter, to Cason Wallace, who was at Kentucky last year, who's also a very good defensive guard who shoots the heck out of the ball. And I think those types of comps work as well. I mean, I just think there are a lot of ways to find landing spots for Reed Sheppard to stick in the NBA. And then if he does become a full-time point guard and can handle those responsibilities, I think he becomes a really special player because of what he does off the ball as a team defender, his instincts, his unbelievable shooting. He doesn't turn the ball over a whole lot. I just think he's a really unique and special player who's going to stick in the NBA a long time and is going to be on a lot of winning rosters. And people are going to say, yeah, he might have even needed to be in the conversation for the number 1 overall pick, and I haven't seen that for a while. Third player I wrote about was Cody Williams, forward at Colorado. If I had to bet today who I thought the Jazz were going to take based on who's going to be available and fit for the Jazz, I think Cody Williams makes a lot of sense. If you don't know Cody Williams' story, he's the younger brother of Jalen Williams, the star forward with the Oklahoma City Thunder. Cody went to Colorado, was a top 10 recruit coming out of high school, kind of chose not a small school in Colorado, but not necessarily, a Kentucky or a blue blood program. Averaged 11.9 points, 3.0 rebounds, 1.6 assists, so his statistical profile doesn't blow you away. His shooting numbers, though, were pretty awesome. 55% from the floor, 41% from the three-point line. He was in the conversation for the number one overall pick. In fact, was the favorite to be the number one overall pick through the first maybe quarter of the college basketball season. Got hurt, had some injuries, and kind of fell out of that conversation, has never gotten back into it, and has actually kind of fallen throughout the process because he's had a facial injury. I think he had an ankle injury, had a wrist injury, so he kind of got beat up. And there's a reason he got beat up. He's thin. Despite the fact that he's 6'9", he's also under 200 pounds. He's going to have to put a significant amount of weight on his frame. But looking at him, he looks like the type of kid that at just 19 years old, when he's 20, 21, 22, and becomes a man, that weight's naturally going to come on. And then you hope that those shooting numbers, 55% from the floor, 41% from three, like I mentioned, continue to translate. He really does some unique things with the ball in his hands. He's really good in the post. He's got great touch. So I believe in his three-point shooting, even though he didn't take a lot, and that's really the knock on him. He was a kind of an unwilling three-point shooter. The fact that his hands were so good, his touch was so good, he did flash that athleticism when he had some opportunities to get into the lane. I think he's going to translate. He might need a year or two. He's going to spend some time in the G League. He's got to get bigger physically. But that's a bet I'm always willing to take for NBA players, is if you've got the height, I think I can put the weight on you. You're going to age in the NBA, and usually you add weight when you age. You gain some of that natural muscle that you get. So I expect that out of Cody Williams. If I had to bet who the Jazz were going to take, like I mentioned, I think it might be Cody Williams at this point. Pretty intriguing player, high talent, going to take a minute, doesn't seem to have a huge ego. Again, huge recruit, chose Colorado. His brother seems happy in Oklahoma City. I don't know if they need the brightest of lights to be satisfied, and might be a fit as far as need goes for the Jazz. Plays a 3-4, 2-3, maybe even a little bit if his skills develop, he could play in the backcourt. So pretty intriguing player. I liked him quite a bit when I watched him, and I'll have to watch him again, even though I've already got my full write-up on him done. So far, we've talked about two players from Kentucky, Reed Sheppard and Rob Dillingham. Just talked about Cody Williams. Let's dive into Ron Holland, maybe the favorite amongst Jazz fans that I've seen. The number one or number two overall recruit, depending on where you looked, coming out of high school. Went and played for the G League Ignite, averaged 18.5 points, 6.7 rebounds, 2.8 assists, shot 47% from the floor, and then the numbers fall off. Just 24% from the three-point line, 68% from the free throw line. Has a really wonky release, kind of puts one hand, his offhand, in front of the ball. It's goofy, but he has elite athleticism. He's kind of that combo forward that we see, the big wing in the NBA that is in vogue and every team seems to want. Great motor on the defensive side of the ball. Really does seem to care, but if he can't shoot the three-point shot, it's really going to limit who he is as a player. I like that they made him play on the ball a little bit in the G League. The problem was they didn't have a point guard, and he probably actually would have benefited from not having the ball in his hands so much. He also would have seen his scoring numbers drop because he wouldn't have been playing in isolation so much, so it might have hurt his draft stock a little bit. And even then, he's projected anywhere from 6, 7, 8, all the way down to 13, 14, 15, and it sounds like he's even doing some workouts down there. I know he's the darling of a lot of online draft Twitter, thinking he's got the most star potential of anyone in this draft. If he doesn't shoot, it's not going to matter. He's not going to become a star in the NBA. But I like that he's 6'7", super athletic, good wingspan, seems to care on the defensive side of the ball. I think he's going to be a two-way player. And if he does shoot, he's going to be a pretty special player. He's going to be pretty intriguing. And I think that's really where you get interest in a guy like this. If they can shoot, and that's a big swing skill for him, he could be special and could be a difference maker. And that's why so many, I know, Draft Knicks fans on Twitter really like him. We will see if he can live up to that idea. That's always easier said than done, I think, when it comes to the draft. But if he does benefit from having the ball in his hand in the G League and gets that opportunity in the NBA, he could be special. You got to remember, it's hard for coaches to hand the ball over to you, especially as a rookie, especially if it's unproven. They don't want to base their future and their job security on a young rookie who's trying to learn how to play with the ball in his hands for the first or second time in his career. Ron Holland played much bigger in high school, was not as much on the ball, played more of the front court. So it's gonna be a jump for him in the NBA. You're asking a lot. He might be better suited on a team that's in a deeper rebuild even than the Utah Jazz are. But if they decide they want to put this rebuild another year deeper and really kind of tank again next season, Ron Holland could make some sense. Let's talk now about his teammate with the G League Ignite, Matas Buzelis. 14.3 points, 6.9 rebounds, 2.0 assists. Shot 44% from the floor, 27% from three, and 68% from the free throw line. Both Modest Buzelis and Ron Holland struggled to shoot the ball at the G League Ignite, which could be a G League Ignite issue. Buzelis had shot the ball much better in his final season of high school before joining the G League, so there might be a little bit something there that those guys were not getting great looks generated for them. But it's a bit of a red flag that Buzelis did not shoot the ball better despite his physical gifts. It is kind of funny to look back at his game logs, though. As soon as Ron Holland got hurt, I should mention that he had a thumb injury late in the year, Buzelis really came on because I just think he got a bigger opportunity. And they're both kind of big, athletic wings. Holland's a little bit better with the ball in his hands right now, though Buzelis showed that a little bit more late in the season. When I watched the G League Ignite, I will say Holland jumped out a lot more. Now, that might be as simple as he had the ball in his hands, and of course that's going to make you jump out more. There were just times when Buzelis seemed to float in and out of the games, didn't have any impact for long stretches, would just stand in the corner, shoot threes occasionally when he got the opportunity, and didn't make a whole lot of them. His athleticism is really special. He finishes on top of the rim really easily, in the half court, catches alley-oops, dunks on a lot of people, dangerous in transition, weirdly blocks a ton of shots for a player at his size. I think the question for him is going to be, does a team try and pigeonhole him into being, a wing, a 2-3, who has to do something with the ball in his hands because that might not be where he's best, or is he going to be a pretty good 4 who might be thin right now but gets stronger and then has elite athleticism and does add that three-point shot where he can knock it down at a reasonable rate, and then you have a 6'9", 6'10 player with great athleticism who can also shoot the three, and you've got, maybe a little mini Kristaps Porzingis who also blocks shots. So he's got some unicorny aspects of himself there. I was down on him, and then so much of draft Twitter has been down on him that I will say just my natural instinct has been like, well, he's projected as the top 5, but by all the real go-to draft people, Kristen Peak at Yahoo Sports, Jonathan Gavoni at ESPN, Wasserman at CBS Sports or Bleacher Report, wherever he's writing. Everyone who is kind of really well-connected has Buzelis in the top 5, and everyone who isn't well-connected seems to slip him down their board to like Chicago at 11. I've kind of had to say, hey, if the experts really like him and the people who have watched him certainly more than I have like him at that level, there's probably a reason. And if he was on the board at 10, it would probably be difficult for the Jazz to pass. I don't think he's going to be on the board at 10 for the Jazz. Anyways, those are the G League Ignite players in the conversation at number 10. Let's move on to Dalton Connect, maybe the safest pick in the players projected to go between 5 and 10. Sharp shooting forward out of Tennessee, averaged 21.7 points, 4.9 rebounds, 1.8 assists, shot 45% from the floor, almost 40% from three on a ton of threes. He did the weird thing where he went to a community college, jumped up to a smaller school. His play just followed him everywhere he went. He was good at every level. It's not like he was bad at Tennessee for 3 years and then got good his senior year, which is kind of a red flag for some draft players. His really high-level play followed him everywhere he went, and then he really broke out in the toughest stage, was named the SEC Player of the Year at Tennessee last year on a very good team. They were top 5, and they had basically no offense. They were elite defensively, and their offense was give the ball to Dalton Connect and see what he can do. And he was great. He shot the heck out of the ball, 21 points per game, but really was scoring in the 30s somewhat regularly, ton of threes, but also can attack off the dribble, very athletic. He's a good player. I kind of don't think he's going to be on the board at 10. I think he's going to be a guy that in this draft where there's so many unknowns and so many guys in this range do have flaws, either they're so young or they don't shoot the ball well, he is a relatively safe bet to be in the NBA for a decade, knocking down threes, using his athleticism, rebounding at a decent rate, not a great passer, certainly an average or below defensive player, but scoring is a huge factor. And at some point in his career, he's going to average between 15 and 20 points per game. And that's a hard guarantee to pass on when you start getting into that 6, 7, 8 range. San Antonio, let's say they take a flyer at number 4. He could make some sense next to Victor Wembanyama, who will cover up all of his defensive issues at number 8. I think Charlotte could use a player like Connect in the top 10 to pair with Brandon Miller and just have 2 big athletic wings who really shoot the ball well. I think that makes a lot of sense. So if he was there at 10 and the Jazz picked him, I think you're happy if you're a Jazz fan. I'm getting the feeling he's not going to be there. He would make sense for Memphis at 9, who's made a long run recently of drafting NBA-ready players and having them step in and play really well and as good as they're expected to be next year with everyone healthy and back on the rotation, I could see him making a lot of sense. So I don't think he's going to be there at 10 for the Jazz, but does a lot of things well. If he ended up being the pick for the Jazz, you'd be happy. We talked to Kristen Peek on my radio show, Jake and Ben, 10 to noon on the KSL Sports Zone. And she said the next player we talked about will not be there at 10, so if the Jazz were to draft him, they would have to trade up to get him. And that is, of course, Stephen Castle, the guard from UConn after just winning the national title. Not their best player, that's Donovan Clingan, who we'll talk about coming up here in just a minute. But Castle averaged 11.1 points, 4.7 rebounds, 2.9 assists, shot 47% from the floor, but like a lot of players in this draft, just doesn't shoot the ball well. 26% from the three-point line, just under 27%. 75% from the free throw line. Has really good touch on floaters around the rim, kind of push shots, pretty athletic, got a lot of dunks in the half court. Defensively, a menace on the ball, just a defensive playmaker. Some believe he's going to be a point guard in the NBA. It sounds like his camp believes he's going to be a point guard in the NBA and was refusing to work out for teams who already have a point guard. Would that eliminate the Jazz after drafting Keontae George or having Colin Sexton? I don't think so. They are more traditionally off-the-ball guards. And Stephen Castle would step in with his size at over 6'5" and really be helpful there, especially if he can play a point guard. He's really interesting. There are elements of Jimmy Butler's game when you watch him. That's not insane to say. Now, that's not fair to put on him because Jimmy Butler has been one of the 10 best players, 15 best players in the NBA for the last decade. I don't expect that out of Stephen Castle, but that's the model of player who doesn't shoot the three particularly well, but does everything else, including as a scorer, to develop as a go-to number one option. And that's why I think Stephen Castle's so exciting, and it doesn't seem like he's going to get past 6 at the very latest. So if the Jazz wanted him, they would have to trade up and get him, and maybe they do. I mean, the Jazz certainly have the ammo to make the moves to go up and pick him. Another guy who will not be on the board at 10, but apparently has drawn some recent interest from the Jazz, some rumors that they would consider trading up, is Donovan Clingan out of UConn. 13 points, 7.4 rebounds, 1.5 assists, shot 64% from the floor, 25% from three, really just didn't shoot the three at all. I don't expect him to be a three-point shooter. And then 58% from the free throw line. I don't like Clingan as much as other players do, or other draft followers do. I get it. I don't think he's and he's a behemoth. He's absolutely massive, over 7 feet tall, well over 250 pounds. And for that size, he moves pretty well, but he doesn't move absurdly well to the point where I feel like you'd have to get him at number 10. And if I were the Jazz and already had Walker Kessler, I might bet on Walker having a bounce-back third season and doing a lot of the same things that Clingan's going to do on the defensive end of the floor, which is be an elite rim protector, someone you can build your defense around, who probably isn't going to ever develop as a three-point shooter. Clingan's a better passer, though not like a crazy short roll passer who's going to find guys all over the floor. More, you throw it to him in the post and he will find cutters. And I think you hope, if you're a Jazz fan, that Walker Kessler just develops into that type of player. Clingan's big. I get it. I like some of what I saw. I would probably, if I were an NBA team, be happier to try and take a Zach Edey at 22 if he's on the board and run with that versus using a top 3 or 4 pick on Donovan Clingan. He's going to end up being the 12th best player in this draft, which has value. And if you hit on that in the lottery, I think you're probably okay with it. But I don't think there's a scenario where he is, the first, second, or third best player in the draft. So the idea that he's going to get taken there, and I think there's a strong likelihood he's off the board by, 5, I think that's a little difficult for me. But I understand why a team needing to build their defense would do it. And Clingan's going to be one of the best defenders, if not the most impactful defender coming out of this class, along with Alexander Sarr. All right, we'll do one more player that I wrote about yesterday, actually. Wouldn't write about him. In fact, when I was doing the lottery show on the KSL Sports Zone, as soon as it came down that the Jazz had fallen from 8 to 10, I basically said, well, that's not a guy I'm going to have to write about, and that's Nikola Topic. But the late reveal that he has a torn ACL has him dropping down draft boards right into the spot where the Jazz would be drafting. Topic is a guard out of Serbia, played in the EuroLeague last year, averaged 14.5 points, 3.2 rebounds, 5.5 assists, shot 49% from the floor. Again, just 30% from the three-point line. He's not a great shooter, but 88% from the free throw line. Awesome playmaker, doesn't over-dribble, catches the ball and gets off of it immediately. He's just always passing the ball. He's always grabbing it and trying to find his teammates. His head is up. His shoulders are up. They're always square to the basket. I really like that in guards. That means he's not missing when players become available. And better yet, it's not like he misses guys when they're available or just passes to players when they're open. He passes players open. You hear about that with the quarterbacks in the NFL throwing a guy open. Topic does that. They're not the flashiest passes. He's not doing a lot of behind the back, between the legs, not nutmegging guys the way you see with some European guards that come over to the NBA, like Milos Teodosic, who came over a few years ago that people were so excited about, and really only lasted a year or two, but he was towards the end of his career. He's not that guy. What he does is every time he passes the ball, you're like, oh, how did the guy roll into the rim get so wide open after that pass? It's because he throws it to the right spot where a guy will, rolling to the rim, catch it mid-spin and realize, okay, all of a sudden his defender's on his back shoulder and he's got an easy dunk. Topic does that a lot. He catches guys when the opposing defender in the far corner is cheating a little bit too in on the low post player near him on the strong side of the floor, and he rifles the ball to the corner three-point shooter and the guy gets an open look. It's the type of stuff that an offense really clicks on when you have that type of player on the floor, as long as he can provide spacing himself with his scoring. Now, he's awesome getting downhill. He does finish at the rim really well. He doesn't dunk the ball ever, but he's really crafty with layups. He's really crafty with little runners and floating hook shots. Like, he's got a lot of natural touch and feel for the game, and I think that will turn up in the NBA, whether he ends up shooting the three-point shot or not. So he's going to be effective, but if he shoots the three, he has a chance to be the best player from this draft class. I wouldn't project that, but if he becomes a high-level three-point shooter, meaning if he gets up to 40%, which is a jump, he's only at 30% now, but if he figures that out, he will become a very special player. Worst case scenario, he's a big backup guard who's in the NBA for 5 or 6 years. If he's on the board at 10 for the Jazz, I think it would be very hard to pass on him. And one of the things that I really like about him is the versatility that he gives the team with how you want to bring him back. I told you he's got a torn ACL. You can give him an entire year off. He can be a major part of your future. You can somewhat tank next year if you want to get in the Cooper Flag standings or the Amari Bailey running. I mean, there was a really good draft class next year, much better than this year's class. If you wanted to slow play it, take another year, and then really, really, really launch into your rebuild next season as far as you've got the pieces in place, maybe even make some trades for some veteran players next offseason, you're in good shape. You could have Topic. You could have another top 10 pick. You could have Keontae George, Taylor Hendricks, Bryce Sensabaugh starting to come into their own. You've probably got Lauri Markkanen in the first year of his new extension at that point. It makes a lot of sense to me. If you think Topic can develop that three-point shot and you like where that knee projects. And again, it seems like all the doctors have said, yeah, it's fine. His knee will be okay. It's just a typical torn ACL, and he will come back from that. So Topic, extremely interesting. A guy I think if you were on the board at 10 would be hard for the Jazz to pass on. All right, that was long. Let's take a break. I hope you learned something about some of the draft prospects all in one spot that might be available for the Jazz at number 10. I will check another couple of boxes on some guys like Devin Carter, Tajon Salon before the draft approaches here in 2 weeks. I will get those written up. But for now, let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and answer your mailbag questions. Welcome back to the Jazz Notes podcast. I'm Ben Anderson. As always, find me on Twitter at Ben's Hoops. Read us at KSLSports.com. All right, let's get into my favorite segment of the podcast. Thanks to everyone who stuck with a long breakdown of draft prospects. I hope that wasn't too monotonous for you, but I thought needed to break down a little bit. And always, if you have more questions next week or something I said or didn't say that you're curious about those players, send them in, and I will answer them on next week's mailbag. All right, let's start with Jake the Lynx. I'm not that excited about the draft, and I'm just ready for next season to start. Do you think the opening night starters versus the Game 20 starters will be the same, or will Will Hardy keep changing like he did last season? Will more roster changes happen in the summer or at least the trade deadline? Yeah, the Jazz are going to have a lot of roster movement. I mean, there's going to be significant roster movement this offseason. You're going to add a draft pick. Now, I mentioned, if it's someone like Topic who's just not going to be available, you're not going to see them. And maybe the Jazz take the same approach that they've done for the last couple of years where some of their rookies, now Walker played right away and Keontae played right away, but Ochai Agbaji didn't play until midway through the season. Taylor Hendricks and Bryce Sensabaugh didn't play until midway through the season. Jazz could absolutely take that same approach next year. I would expect Colin Sexton, Lauri Markkanen, John Collins to start next year, assuming they're all on the roster. And again, we just don't know if that's going to be the case. I think that's who's going to start. What does that mean for everybody else? I think that's a rotating spot. Keontae could start. Maybe he comes off the bench. Maybe you go out and you get a veteran point guard who steps in and is ready to play right away. Maybe you do add another wing either in the draft or on the trade market or in free agency that could come in and start. And then, you're just going to be tinkering with things. Will Hardy's kind of a tinkerer. And if the Jazz are winning games early, he will stick with a good roster that he's won with. I don't know if the Jazz are going to win a lot of games early next season. I guess it depends on what they do this offseason. So I would imagine the opening night roster and the Game 20 roster would be pretty significantly different next year because the Jazz are going to mix around with young players. Like, let's say they don't even add anybody and they just run it back basically with the same roster they have next season and a couple of draft picks. You're going to figure out different opportunities with Keontae. You're going to try Bryce Sensabaugh. You're probably going to try Taylor Hendricks. Maybe he's a starter. Maybe he's not a starter. Maybe Walker moves into the starting lineup. Can John Collins buy into not being a full-time starter if that's something that presents itself and it's better for the team? So I think there's a lot of different options to work with there if you're Will Hardy. Utah Jazz news. Do you believe there's a star that we don't think is available that actually is available behind closed doors on the trade market? Say a Cade, Cunningham, Zion Williamson, or an Anthony Davis even. There always is. There's always somebody available that you're not quite sure is available. Would Milwaukee trade Damian Lillard now? Is Chris Middleton available? Are those stars? Chris Middleton's been a very good player for a long time. Those opportunities do always present themselves. We know Trae Young's available. We know DeJounte Murray's available. Is Julius Randle out there and available suddenly because the Knicks liked how they finished the season, want to get off his salary and want to add some more, either young players or draft assets or something to make up for the inevitable loss of some of the talent that they already have on their roster. I could see that become available. So yes, I'm sure there are players available and star level players that are available that we don't know of. The question is, do they fit the Jazz timeline? James Harden's available this offseason. Paul George is probably going to be available if he doesn't sign this contract. I'm not sure that's exactly what the Jazz are looking for. So, yeah, I think they are. Do I know who they are? Of course not. That would be well reported in this case if I knew who those stars would be. But it just doesn't take a whole lot for a player to change. One of the funny things for the Jazz is they set up their roster and all these assets to be able to acquire stars, and it just so happened that not that many stars have become available since they blew it up in 2022. Now it's going to come this summer. Jimmy Butler's a candidate to be moved. I wouldn't be surprised if Minnesota does something somewhat aggressive. We know Cleveland's going to trade Darius Garland if Donovan Mitchell resigns, and if Donovan doesn't resign, they're going to trade Donovan. So there's going to be stars on the move this summer, and that always opens up opportunities for 3-team trades where the Jazz could get involved, and that's again where these other stars pop up who you might not be expecting. Clayson on Twitter says, if the Jazz package 29 and 32, how high could they move in the draft? Milwaukee, Phoenix range or higher? Certainly not higher. Those are the two teams I would circle as maybe the highest, Milwaukee and Phoenix. Phoenix is picking at 22. Milwaukee's picking at 23. The advantage for those teams who are over the luxury tax and really into that second apron that's really punitive when you're paying that much money is they can trade back down to 29 and lower the cost of their first-round draft pick, and then add another pick in the second round with the number 32 overall pick, the second pick overall, and you get a player at, you can sign a two-way player out of that. There's just no guaranteed money involved. You can sign them to whatever you want to sign them to at the rookie minimum. So there's value there. I guess the problem is Milwaukee has the 33rd overall pick already, so they're not going to want the 32nd pick. I don't think that does a whole lot for them. So Phoenix would make some sense. Phoenix needs young players. They need more players. And maybe at 22, they don't think there's a huge gap between the player they will get there and at 29. And then they would also like to add the 32nd pick. I could see that. If a player the Jazz like is on the board and drops to number 22, and the Jazz say, well, we don't want to add 3 first-round picks or 3 picks this year, 3 rookies, but they're okay with 2. And maybe there's a win-now player they like, a Tyler Kolek or a Zach Edey that they think could help them now. Maybe they do jump up to number 22 and grab them. Or, look, a player that they want to stash in the G League all year next year. Keyshawn George from Miami, who's a ways out from being a contributor but has some interesting tools. The Jazz could absolutely do that. So I wouldn't rule that out. I think the Jazz are going to want to either trade out of some of those picks or consolidate them to move up. They may just want to kick the can down the road and get another future pick for them. But I don't think they're going to make all these picks. So, yeah, trade-up opportunities. Very realistic there. Minnesota's got the 27th pick. That's probably not enough. It's probably not worth moving up enough for the Jazz to trade 29 and 32. Washington's at 26, maybe, and Washington doesn't have an early second rounder because that's actually the pick the Jazz are making at number 32. Maybe that's a team. New York having the 24th and 25th picks back-to-back probably eliminates that as an opportunity. So I would say Phoenix is probably the team I would most closely circle or closely watch if you're a Jazz fan, hoping that they move up in the draft. Whether that's possible or not, we'll have to see on draft night. Jay Christian, could we get Peyton Pritchard for number 29? Probably not. Peyton Pritchard is about to be, it looks like, a backup guard on a championship-winning team. He is just 26 years old. And I would also ask, what do you want Peyton Pritchard for? And I get it. 47% from the floor, 38% from three. A pest defensively. I don't know if he's an elite defender, but he's certainly a pest. Averages 9 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists. If you think there's some break out there that he's not getting the opportunity right now in Boston and he's about to take the next step, Will Hardy certainly knows him very well from their time together in Boston. There might be some interest there. That's why I think the Jazz have brought in Luka Šamanić, as Will Hardy knew him in San Antonio and said, yeah, there might be something there. That could be an opportunity. Absolutely. And the 29th pick would get you a player, or Peyton Pritchard would bring in a player who can win now and play right away. Those are, I guess, are the types of opportunities you could look for. But, again, I just mentioned a name like Tyler Kolek that could come in and do some similar things. There are generally guys available late in the first round, like Peyton Pritchard, who can come in and be Peyton Pritchard, and then you get them at the very beginning of their rookie contract and not at the end of it. So it's not a bad idea. I don't hate that idea. If the Jazz are looking to get more win-now players right now, I still think where the Jazz are in the rebuild, it probably makes sense to just draft a player and hope you hit on a star if you want to take a flyer late in that spot. Jazz Time Jones, you guys are the best. Thanks for following us. He says, I'm struggling to see Zach Edey's fit in the NBA. Break it down for me, please. It's both similar to what he did at Purdue and completely dissimilar to what he did at Purdue. He is 7'3", 7'4", and 300 pounds. He's just going to enter the NBA as the biggest player in the world. There's value to that. And we are moving towards behemoths in the NBA again, at least super height players. Now, look, he's going to be toast if he's trying to guard Victor Wembanyama on the perimeter or Chet Holmgren on the perimeter. But if you're a team that wants rebounding and a screen setter and a guy who's going to score efficiently on offensive rebounds, and you can probably give him the ball in the post, and he can make some hook shots like he showed he was able to do at Purdue, make some little turnaround jump shots. And he's a player. I don't think he's going to play 30 minutes a game. I think if you draft him expecting that, it's a mistake, but that's why he's not going in the top 10. No one's drafting him to be a 30-minute-a-night player. I think you hope he plays 15. He's in incredible shape. I think he likes basketball. I think fans would be shocked at the number of 7-footers who don't like basketball and are only there because it pays unbelievably well, and it just so benefits that being that tall is a real shortcut to making the NBA. A lot of 7-footers are not absurdly talented. The ones that are talented generally make it. Zach Edey's talented. He cares. He wants to be good. He's gotten significantly better during his time in college, and that's both from a physical standpoint, he's gotten in great shape, and his skills have really developed. I think he's a good passer. So a lot of those things I like. And then, again, plant him in the paint. He's exclusively a drop big, and that's going to be hard. He's going to have a hard time defending the pick and roll. But there are specifically drop big players in the NBA who fall back to the rim and put their hands up and make it hard to shoot around, and I think he's going to be able to do that. So as far as backup centers go in the NBA, I think he's going to be one for a long time. Do you want to draft a backup center in the NBA in the first round? I don't know. Jazz really whiffed on Udoka Azubuike. I bet he's a better player than Udoka Azubuike was when he plays. Another cool one from Jazz Time Jones. With so many prospects with varying weaknesses, I'm thinking Dalton Knecht is the pick for Utah. If you get a 17-point-per-game scorer, you take it. And then you pray he plays D, or do you go for a home run swing like Holland? Like I said, I think Holland is going to be on the board. I don't think Dalton Knecht's going to be, exactly for the reason you're saying. I think Knecht is going to be a safe pick that is an NBA rotation player, top 6 or top 7 player, may never be top 3, which you hope Ron Holland can be a top 3 player in a rotation. but you're happy to just have Connect, who shoots threes, gets out in transition, dunks the ball, can actually attack a little bit off the dribble, but may not become a star. There's a ton of value in that. Is it the value the Jazz want? I don't know. The Jazz still need another star to play next to Lauri Markkanen, and I think Holland gives you a little bit more of that upside swing. But if Holland whiffs, you might set yourself back. I don't think the Jazz are afraid of whiffing in the draft. If the Jazz are afraid of whiffing in the draft, I don't know if they take Taylor Hendricks. I don't know if they take Keontae George. They could have taken Jaime Jaquez last year and had a safer pick. But they went with some home run swings. Do they want to keep doing that until they find the guy who really matches up as a top 3 player? Or are they going to let those younger players, Taylor Hendricks and Keontae George, and even Bryce Sensabaugh was a bit of a home run swing, develop and then take some safer players to put some infrastructure around them? I think there's logic to both. I think sometimes you just keep drafting until you get to the star, a la the Philadelphia 76ers and the process. And sometimes I think bringing in players who actually know how to play the game to allow other stars to develop really makes a lot of sense. There are opportunities for both. I don't think, as I mentioned, Dalton Connect's going to be on the floor when the Jazz are drafting. Alex, he always sends these in, and I sometimes forget to answer them, so I'll make sure I answer this one, the final mailbag question. Ben, if you were Danny Ainge, would you trade Colin Sexton, the number 10, for San Antonio's number 4 and number 8? And if so, what player are you getting from San Antonio, or who are you drafting? I'm not trading Colin Sexton. I've just continued to really, the further we get away from the season, and maybe this is bad reporting, or bad analysis, I just really like what he offered. I mean, starting with that Knicks game in December till the end of the season, which was a 55-game sample. He started 51 of those 55 games. I think that shows you what Will Hardy thinks of him, considering how hard he plays. He averaged 21.5 points, 5.5 assists, and he shot 50, 40, and like well over 80 from the from the free throw line. He was super efficient. He plays every night. Some nights he plays 22 minutes. Some nights he plays 32 minutes. He doesn't seem mad after the game about either. He always produces. He does it efficiently. He's young, and he's affordable. So if San Antonio came with just the 4th and the 8th pick, and then all of a sudden you had 4 and 8 and 10, maybe that's intriguing. Now you're going super young. You're leaning really into a crazy rebuild at that point. And again, that probably just doesn't make any sense. But, Colin Sexton is a better prospect than any of the guys I think on the board at 4, period. And then, of course, he's going to be way better than anyone on the board at 8. So, no, I'm just not trading Colin Sexton. It would take something really special for me to move off Colin Sexton at this point. I see the DeJounte Murray trade talks. I'm just thinking, man, how much better is he than Colin Sexton? Do we know he's a little bigger, kind of a better defensive player? He's hit some clutch shots, shoots the 3 certainly better than he did early in his career, but Colin's pretty special and is getting back from this knee injury, and you got him for a couple of years, and he seems to like Utah. I would ride it out with Colin Sexton for a little while and see what he develops into this year and run with that. I'm pretty intrigued by Colin Sexton as a major piece on this Jazz roster. All right. Appreciate you sticking with me. I think that's all the mailbag questions. Chandler Holt will be back next week. We'll do a couple more of these draft conversations and answer your mailbag questions. So if we didn't answer your question, send them in. We will answer them on the mailbag next week. Thanks for following the Jazz Notes podcast. You can do it in your podcast app, wherever you get your podcast. Like us, rate us, review us. We always appreciate that. That helps. And, of course, subscribe and read us at KSLSports.com. We'll be back with you again next week.